Welcome to the Grayzone. It's Max Blumenthal. Iran's protests have continued for weeks, and now the protests appear to have entered a different and much darker phase, with calls for regime change from the United States and other countries that have historically antagonized Iran growing much louder. So to discuss recent developments inside Iran, I'm joined today by Iranian scholar and independent researcher Setareh Sadeghi, who has previously joined the Grayzone to talk about the protests and to present a view scarcely heard in Western mainstream media. Welcome to the Grayzone, Setareh.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks for being here, and for everyone watching, thanks for bearing with any connection troubles we might have. But it's important to get the view from Isfahan, which is where you're based right now, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So Iran's government has announced that the mandatory hijab law is now under review following these protests. What does that mean, and how would you generally describe the course of the protests at this point?
I also said in the last conversation we had, the issue of the morality police or the guidance patrol, as well as the issue of mandatory hijab, was already being discussed. There was a discourse on it in the country, and there were online campaigns calling for abolishing either or both the morality police and the mandatory hijab. But now the government has announced, in order to show that they're going to take into account public opinion, that they're going to review the mandatory hijab, discussing it with different organizations and NGOs, and receiving comments from everyone. But they have also kind of implied that they don't think this is like changing or abolishing the mandatory hijab is something that a majority are calling for, and but still they're taking it into consideration. But with regards to the morality police or the guidance patrol, as translated it correctly in from the Farsi version, there's already, like, the government is not clearly and explicitly declaring that they have or they are going to abandon it, but there are discussions and implications that they might do so, even though like enforcing the law, if it remains there, will continue, but probably in different manners.
So we've heard a lot about a national strike in Iran. I believe the New York Times, whose reporter was not actually in the country, has said that the strike is causing entire Iranian cities, including Isfahan, where you are, to appear like shuttered ghost towns. So what inspired this strike, and to what extent is the New York Times and other Western media correct in its characterization that pretty much the entire country has been shut down? This report appeared on December 6th.
Well, December 6th, and I was going to a university on December 5th, and I was going out on December 6th in Isfahan, and like the places that I was walking through and visiting were all crowded. The university was open, classes were held. The subway was actually crowded with people going shopping and doing regular things. There might have been shops that decided to close to just show maybe solidarity with the protesters. But we also saw intimidation and threatening coming from the so-called protesters or rioters that threatened shopkeepers that if they don't close their shops, they're going to burn their shops or just cause damage to them. Many shopkeepers did not give in to that, but some decided they wanted to probably stay on the safe side and maybe decided to close their shops. I personally did not see any shops closed, and I actually went today and yesterday and the day before yesterday. I
Well,
went
we're
to
looking
different
at a tweet.
neighborhoods and I did not see any shops closed.
Okay, well, I have on screen a tweet from Mohammed Morandi stating that the British-based Manoto Persian media outlet has labeled threats to burn down shops that remain open an initiative for joining the strike. And here's an image of one of those some graffiti on a shop that's apparently threatening. Can you describe what's going on here?
Sure. Yeah, the graffiti says that if you are open tomorrow, we will burn your shop. And then the headline and the description by Manoto is that this is like a creative way to call people for going on strike. So I think that sends the message that how many shopkeepers don't really want to go on a strike and they don't want to join. And some people, if they have joined, some have joined it because they have been threatened.
So would you say that
I also have seen, yeah, I have also seen there. I saw one image from Isfahan where a shop was open and like these rioters online, they had taken pictures of the shop and sending the information and asking people to go and damage the shop because it's kept open. And there are some images that show like the shops are closed and the bazaars are closed, which you cannot actually identify what's time of the day that's happening. So you can't say for sure that this is the time that shops were usually and normally open, and they're not. And I have heard from my friends in different cities that they have even in Tehran, that they have seen bazaars and shops open and just the normal activities going on.
Okay, so would you say that the characterization of the strike in Western media was a little overhyped, or did the strike actually have an impact on the Iranian government's decision making?
No, I don't think it has an impact because if it has happened in a very small scale, and this is something that it's very difficult to find happening in a large scale across the country. And as I said, my observation and my friend's observation is totally against what we are hearing on the media. I'm sure there are a few people who have decided to close their shops, but it's not a national and nationwide strike that's going on.
Okay, well, the strike has certainly disproportionately shown disproportionate participation from certain populations. And the Tony Blair Institute published a really notable poll, maybe not for the reason they want it to be notable, claiming that 84% of secular participants in the protests seek regime change. And here's a graphic from their presentation of the poll, which 84% of Iranians who are anti-compulsory hijab also want regime change. And it does seem like Tony Blair, one of the architects of the regime change war on Iraq, is promoting regime change here. I mean, this graphic is really like a celebration of regime change. The Iranian people want regime
Exactly.
change. That seems to be the message here. But what do you think, Setareh Sadeghi, about this poll? Is this credible?
No, I don't think this is credible. And a lot of people who are actually against the compulsory hijab do not really want a regime change. They are seeking reforms. But at the same time, I think it shows how probably a lot of the rioters are just looking for regime change rather than reforming a law they think is not correct to be there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of regime change, I mean, we've heard sort of a shift in tone from Washington, or a sharper tone from Washington. Joe Biden, who previously had called for regime change in Moscow during his speech in Poland about the Ukraine proxy war, recently called for change in Iran's government relating to these protests that we're discussing now. We also heard the following from John Bolton, and I'm going to play this clip now, which suggests John Bolton, the former national security advisor to Donald Trump, that an active insurgency is underway, sponsored at least indirectly by the U.S.
اپوزیسیون ایران حالا داره مسلح میشه با
The Iranian
اسلحه هایی
opposition is
که
now
از
being armed with
پایگاه‌های
weapons
بسیج
stolen from
گرفته،
besieged
با
stations,
اسلحه
and
هایی
also the
که
weapons
از
which are being
نقاط
imported to
کردستان
Iran from
عراق
Iraq's
داره
Kurdistan
وارد
region.
ایران میشه. برای همین
So
فکر
I
میکنم
think
که
the prospect of a
چشمانداز
systematic
یک
effort by
تلاش
the opposition is
سیستماتیک
there.
اپوزیسیون نه فقط
Not only
اعتراض بلکه
protest, but
به
also the
کارگیری
use of
زور و
force
قوه
against the
قهریه
government sends
علیه
a
حکومت با
message,
این پیام که ما دیگه غیر
implying that we're
مسلح
no
نیستیم.
longer unarmed. So that was John Bolton on BBC Persian. And then the same day of the US-Iran football match in the World Cup, we saw that the US and Israel held joint military drills simulating a strike on an Iranian nuclear facility. So what's going on here, and to what extent are these protests turning, at least in parts, into an insurgency aimed at regime change?
Well, I think when the protests started back in September, there were a lot of angry people. They had grievances, legitimate grievances against what happened to Mahsa Amini and the guidance patrol that was going on. But from the very beginning, the protesters were chanting the slogans against the establishment, and soon it turned into riots. And within a few weeks, we saw armed clashes happening, and a lot of security forces have been killed. A lot of these Persian-speaking propaganda channels were encouraging the killings of what they called security forces or police officers, but sometimes were actually ordinary people. And so we saw a lot of violent involvement of apparently armed elements within the protest, and which either hijacked the protest or just tried to intimidate people and turn it into something that they thought would actually be an armed insurgency against the establishment. But this is one reason that a lot of the people who were initially involved in the legitimate protests wanted to back off, and they did not want to be involved in it anymore. So what we are seeing, what is still continuing to happen, is happening at a very smaller scale, and it's very violent. And it looks like they're looking for just a project of creating martyrs for this so-called revolution that they've been saying that it's going to happen at any time. And we saw a lot of killings happening, which is very difficult to find out, like how this is happening and who's killing people, and this has created an environment that makes protesting, I would say, impossible. It's just riots and armed clashes now.
Well, someone who's been ubiquitous on US cable news whenever these protests and riots are concerned is Masih Alinejad. We've talked about her before. She's essentially a US intelligence asset or US government cutout. She has been sponsored by the US broadcasting agency Voice of America for years. And here she is with Jake Tapper, noted pro-Israel commentator who serves as a CNN host, making some really what comments that I found completely bizarre, being egged on by Tapper. And we have no volume, so I'll just cut that part.
To a stadium. So that is why I'm calling on the rest of the world to be the voice of Iranian people and see that how Iranian people are celebrating the U.S. victory.
So that's interesting that you don't see the team as symbolic of the Iranian people, because obviously last week, after the Iranian players refused to sing the national anthem, Iran's supreme leader threatened to torture or imprison their players' family. They sang it today. Is that normal behavior for the Ayatollah to threaten families if people don't show the kind of nationalism he wants?
Jake, the Islamic Republic does everything to put pressure on people to remain silent. You see that many teenagers, many schoolgirls, their family members are being forced to go on TV to denounce their children who got killed in Iran protests, you know? So, of course, they put pressure on athletes as well, but they can choose. Like now, many well-known athletes like Ali Karimi, like Ali Daei lives in Iran, one of the best football player in the history of Iran, is now standing with the people of Iran. Voria Ghafouri.
Okay, so essentially what she said is that most Iranians were celebrating the U.S. defeat of Iran's national team in the World Cup, and that Iranian football players are standing with the people, and the people essentially want the downfall of Iran's Islamic revolutionary government. What do you make of those comments and just of that general exchange?
Well, I mean, as you described her, she's obviously a CIA agent and a VOA employee, and with a very clear agenda of pursuing regime change, even if it's by military intervention. She was a few weeks ago at a NATO gathering and talking to NATO, officers about what to do with Iran, and she doesn't understand Iran.
Sorry to cut in. This was the Halifax Security Forum, and
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and she was asked about. I mean, she has been pictured with Pompeo and other hawkish U.S. officials, and so I mean, it's clear where it comes from.
وقتشه که به لابی هایی که در خارج کشور هستن که در همین نشست هم حضور داشتن اعضای نایاک و به شما میگن که حمله نظامی نکنید، به شما میگن که سفارتخونه ها رو نبندید، به اونها گوش نکنید، برای اینکه اصلا کسی دنبال حمله نظامی نرفته. اون کسی که داره اتفاقا مردم رو قتل عام میکنه و جنگ رو تحمیل کرده خود جمهوری اسلامیه و حضور ما در اینجا اهمیتش از این بابته که بتونیم جامعه جهانی رو آگاه بکنیم که الان وقتش رسیده که یک، انقلاب ایران رو به رسمیت بشناسید، دو، سفارتخونه ها رو ببندید، سه، تمام دیپلمات های جمهوری اسلامی رو اخراج بکنید و مهمتر از همه صندوقی تشکیل بدید برای حمایت از کسانی که در ایران اعتصاب میکنن، صندوقی تشکیل بدید برای اینکه ارتش ایران رو دعوت بکنید، جنگ روانی باید بکنه غرب با جمهوری اسلامی آنگونه که جمهوری اسلامی داره با ما میکنه و دعوت بکنه به اینکه اگر شما متوقف بکنید قتل عام رو ما پشت شما هستیم.
And it's interesting how she mentions the former footballers as like standing with the Iranian nation, while one of the footballers that she actually mentioned has been known for posting fake news, posting, for example, pictures of a terrorist attack in Afghanistan a few years ago as something that is happening in Iran. I have seen at least 3-4 such cases of very obvious lies that he has been spreading, and a lot of people are saying that he has been probably paid to provoke more riots. He has been also talking against the army and calling for, as I said, people to go on strikes and riots and everything. And that's not the case. I watched the game with friends, and then a lot of people were sad, even from people who were very sympathetic to the protesters, because like in any other country, you don't see the national team as the team of the government or a so-called regime. It's something that you feel as part of your identity, to support your national team because the name of your country appears there, and it doesn't really have much to do with the government that runs it. That's the same, like we celebrate the national team's achievements during the Pahlavi, although the Pahlavi dictatorship was not popular. So we distinguish between like a national football team and the government. And this is the same for any, I think it's the same for any country. And maybe she celebrates this because that's the only victory that she feels she has had. Like she stands with the US's football team. But that's not true about the majority of Iranian. Actually, a poll inside Iran shows that there is a very small minority who like were like maybe happy with how the team lost against the US.
Right. Well, I guess she also stands with the referees because there was a pretty suspicious call at the end of that match. But yeah, this is how I think we know that regime change is in the air, is that Masih Alinejad is not only ubiquitous on US TV, but she is also being shepherded around by none other than Bernard-Henri Lévy, who is claimed credit for introducing Hillary Clinton to the Libyan opposition and convincing her to support the NATO assault on Libya, which destabilized the entire country and much of the region. He also claimed credit for involvement in Syria. He's very close with the U.S. and Israeli backed wing of the Kurds in Kurdistan. And here he is with a typically pretentious, overblown column slobbering all over Masa Amini. Emmanuel Macron supports Iran's new revolution. This is in the Wall Street Journal. And France's president speaks boldly after meeting Masih Alinejad and 3 other activists. I love how he introduces the column. I met Masih Alinejad in New York. This brave Iranian-American journalist, strangely no one here has ever read her journalism, who has pleaded the cause of her countrywomen and men before Anthony Blinken, Mike Pompeo, and Hillary Clinton, is an exceptional political animal. Her strong head surrounded by the mane of a lion, an iron will behind the Baudelarian lightness of her fleecy hair falling in curls to the shoulders. Wow, he's quoting Baudelaire because she has curly hair. It's getting a little bit tense. Well, when she mentioned France, which, like many of the world's dissidents, she views as a homeland of democracy along with the US, she voices her respect for President Emmanuel Macron, whom she sees along with Joe Biden as a co-leader of the free world. I mean, that's a very purplish column, and I don't think many French people view Emmanuel Macron in the same way. I think only a tiny minority at this point. But what does this say about Iran's opposition? Is there an opposition inside Iran that stands apart from these absurd neoconservative displays of fealty to Biden and Macron as the leader of the free world? Or is this the way that the critics of the government actually think?
Well, there are both types of critics. Like there are people who are actually criticizing the government because they want improvements and reforms, and they have seen that over the past 43 years, even if it was very difficult at some times, they have pursued change and they have seen the results. So they have seen how laws have been reformed, the situation for women have improved, the situation for workers have improved, and it keeps changing. It may deteriorate at some point, but improve at other points. So they criticize what can be reformed and try to organize for reforms and for improvements and more achievements with regards to civil rights or just the status of the things in the country. But there are also other people who are influenced. Many of them are influenced by forces outside who think the only way to have a better life in Iran is to topple the current establishment, which is, like democratically elected. And obviously they are a minority, but given loudspeakers, because they echo what the regime change agenda seeks to echo throughout the world. But there are, I think it's important to know that a lot of people who are angry at what happened to, for example, Mahsa Amini or the morality police or even the mandatory hijab do not necessarily want a different government, a different form of government. You can find even secular citizens or activists who are calling for the government to reform certain laws without seeking to to change the regime, and they're usually not given a voice by the mainstream media in the West.
Well, we've seen beyond these figures who have been recruited by the U.S. government. There are a lot of influencers that have cachet on Instagram, or they have celebrity throughout the West who speak Farsi and also have influence inside Iran. One person I'm thinking of is Nazanin Boniadi, the actress, who I think recently called for a regime change here. I mean, is that what we're seeing here?
Yes.
That so
yeah, that hashtag sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So this was a hashtag that was trending, and it's a pro-regime change hashtag. How much do these figures have influence inside Iran, and what is the significance of influencers getting involved, and just social media in general? I know Telegram has been a really important tool for driving the protests. And Iran's government has argued that Telegram has also been used to provide instructions for rioters on how to wreak as much havoc as possible and kill security services.
Yeah, that's true. Telegram is one of them, but also Twitter and Instagram. And interestingly, a lot of people have been reporting these accounts that teach how to create Molotov cocktails or how to attack security forces. You see influencers like beauty product, selling beauty products, or just teaching people how to make to put makeup on their faces, now suddenly becoming activists on how to kill security forces or attack police officers, or how to make cocktail Molotovs to attack different buildings and security forces. And people like Nazanin Boniadi, I think Iranian people inside Iran have not forgotten. Even a lot of people within the diaspora who are probably, even against a lot of the things that the government does, they have not forgotten how Nazanin Boniadi in an interview described the crippling sanctions that are actually killing people as a chemotherapy. She said in that interview that well, yes, sanctions hurt, but it's like chemotherapy, and when you do chemotherapy to eradicate a cancer, you also kill healthy cells. And this is how she talks about the suffering of her nation. And let's not forget that she comes from the she used to be a Scientologist, and who was set up to date Tom Cruise to keep him in the Scientology church. So, and she left Iran, as she has confessed. She left Iran when she was 20 days old. So she has absolutely no clue about what the Iranians want or what's best for them. And she has been just pursuing regime change. I mean, that hashtag is basically says the target is the whole establishment. So it has nothing to do with women's right or hijab or the morality police. It's for regime change.
Right. And you have you've actually commented on another noted feminist and advocate of women's rights, who is I think one of the foremost supporters of women's rights in the world, and that's Jordan Peterson. Of course, I'm being completely sarcastic. He's kind of like a men's rights advocate.
Exactly.
You know, there's a war on boys going on. There's a real war on boys, and yet he's really getting active in supporting these Iran protests. He was also recently in Jerusalem celebrating Israel's settlers at a settler-sponsored event alongside Ben Shapiro. And here he is retweeting Mariam Rajavi, who is the head of the People's MEK organization, which is literally sponsored by the CIA. So what's going on here? I mean, is this really for these figures? Is this about women's rights? Why are these
not.
US
I mean, yes.
I mean, these are Western conservatives getting involved.
Yeah, like we have also seen J.K. Rowling retweeting absolutely fake images claiming they are from Iran. Like there was the case of one Turkish drama scene that was claimed to be an Iranian father mourning, and she retweeted that with almost 14 million followers without doing a basic fact check. And Jordan Peterson has also retweeted and follows Masih al-Nejad. So it looks like a project. And this project is not only about Iran, maybe it's more targeted towards, I think, the Muslim world as well, because Peterson a few months ago issued a message to the Muslims where he was asking, telling Muslims that they have to embrace the Abraham Accords and kind of tell them to encourage a normalization of relations with the Zionist regime. And I think this comes because he knew that at some point he had many followers among Muslims, because he was talking against the normalization of the woke culture. So that's what got him a lot of followers among Muslims, as well as just other people who are against the woke culture. So I think he took that opportunity probably as a part of a project to first promote normalization of relations with the Zionist regime, and then he was probably assigned a project to work on retweeting the most extreme terrorist and regime change agents against the Iranian nation.
Well, you've gone head to head, Setareh Sadeghi, against some extremely vicious supporters of regime change in Iran, who I want to play a clip from one of those exchanges that I think really symbolizes the attitude that you're confronting. And this is you on TRT, the Turkish broadcaster.
And the UN has basically become a tool for maintaining U.S. hegemony.
Borzoo, go ahead. I could see you had a comment.
I think that Iran is an extremely autocratic dictatorship. I think
and Saudi Arabia is a democracy.
Hey, we let you speak.
And
we got to watch that again.
I think
and Saudi Arabia is a democracy.
Hey, we let you speak.
Well, that was really nice. Very gracious, polite discussion. That's Borzoo Daragahi. Who is Borzoo? And what was going on there?
Well, he's part of the Atlantic Council, and he has written on various outlets, but pursuing regime change. And I guess he also has worked with TRT because he's based in Istanbul. And like in that interview, I had a lot of technical problems which for some reason were not taken care of. Like I could barely hear anyone, and I was interrupted by the presenter and the two guests. Like you saw the reaction that I got. And it's interesting, Max, how he says, "We let you speak." I really wonder who he's referring to when he's talking about "we let you speak." That's so, I mean, it's,
I
I think
don't know.
that's
It's
suggests a
Turkish,
lot of
so
things.
NATO maybe, because NATO is the sponsor of the think tank where he is a fellow, and NATO is Turkey's a NATO member
And maybe
state.
Saudis.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he got really angry that I asked him if Saudi is a democracy. That's apparently triggered him. So I'm wondering if the Saudis are also included in that "we."
Yeah. How dare you, this whataboutism about Saudi Arabia. But, I've had my own run-ins with this bozo, Daragahi. He once when I published a two-part investigation into this quote unquote Syrian white helmets, which were sponsored by the UK, US, and Gulf states, he tweeted that the reason that I did this was because my father beat my mother, and therefore I was siding with the abuser by criticizing or publishing facts about this information warfare operation that was also aimed at regime change. And, he was a relentless supporter of regime change in Syria, and would always personally attack me whenever I, criticized the dirty war. Really vicious character, but it's telling because he was at BuzzFeed for a while and then got his soft landing at the Atlantic Council, which is actually not only sponsored by NATO, but also Saudi Arabia. So you definitely struck a nerve there. You also get kind of a flood of threats and nasty messages from supporters of regime change. I don't know if you want to address that, but what is it like? I mean, you're one of the few figures in Western media presenting a different view from the ground.
Yes, I mean, when people don't have arguments to disagree with you, I think they come with threats or personal attacks. So, it's because I appear on media. I mean, it's a natural, it's something that I expect to come, but it has been unprecedented on how, for example, I tweeted about how the Iranian national team has a Sunni soccer player and has had a Christian captain and a Christian assistant coach, like Iranian Christian assistant coach. And even that tweet triggers a lot of these trolls and sometimes like real personalities on Twitter to send me vulgar messages and threaten me. And I mean, I just think that it's because they feel desperate that their revolution is not happening and that they have to stay out of it and that they have to get their hands off Iran. So I understand that's very frustrating for them, and they don't even have arguments to disagree. So they come with vulgar threatening messages. And yeah, I mean, almost every day get some sort of those kinds of messages.
Well, I guess I can relate. Just really quickly, where do you think this is going? Where do you think the protests are going? And is it fair to compare this to the brief protests that took place in Cuba in 2021, which were then kind of instrumentalized by the Biden administration to take Obama's normalization with Cuba off the table? Do you think that Washington might take the same approach to completely freeze the JCPOA, Iran nuclear deal?
Well, it seems that's the plan. Like even after the U.S. like abide by its commitment according to the JCPOA and tried to show goodwill and tried to cooperate with the signatories. But the U.S. kept, kept making excuses not to allow it to happen. And they have always used this as some tools for their election whenever there are elections. I mean, Iran is one option to talk about and say how they will manage the relations. But the rhetoric coming from the White House and what we have seen so far, especially on how the U.S. has been supporting the riots and armed insurgencies as they are describing it now, I don't think they have any intention to let the deal happen. And it's not only, I mean, the U.S. and as you also mentioned, U.S. and Israel had a drill against Iran and to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. So, what message does that send? If you are doing a drill with the Zionist regime and signaling some sort of attack on nuclear facilities, then what is a deal? Like, you can't show diplomacy and military invasion of nuclear facilities at the same time. And the message that the Iranian people and the government can receive from that is that there's no will to revive the deal from the U.S. side.
Setareh Sadeghi, thanks so much for joining us from Isfahan, Iran.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching another episode of the Grayzone. You can support us at patreon.com/Grayzone. Follow us at thegrayzone.com and on YouTube and Twitter at the Grayzone News. I'm Max Blumenthal. See you next time.